Hello, and welcome to another episode of Dead Times, the only horror movie podcast recorded while walking in a New York City subway tunnel. I'm your host, Peter, and with me, as always, is the guy who knows who Superman is, Tim. Tim, how you doing?
I'm doing just fine. Wait, you know who Superman is too?
I do know who Superman is.
Are you aware of Garfield?
No, that I'm not aware of.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, today we're
It's the
going to
best exchange in the movie. The movie's pretty light on dialogue, but that's the best part.
Today we're going to be talking about Cloverfield from 2008, which will be our first found footage horror movie and our second giant monster movie. And you'd seen this before, hadn't you, Tim?
Yeah, I've seen this a couple times. I did not see it in the theater. I saw it on DVD. I think I got it from the library the first time that I saw it, which was a long time. Yeah, I've seen it a couple times.
Yeah, I did see this in the theater twice. And so I guess my first question to you is, having seen it now, how do you view it in the light of having watched Godzilla for the first time?
I mean, I knew that, again, just having some kind of awareness of the kaiju genre, and knowing, even knowing what Godzilla is and, what, some of the other characters that have followed after Godzilla, I knew that there was a connection there. I think all in all, they're not all that similar. They're both movies about giant monsters attacking cities that serve as semi-political allegories. But, the scope of Godzilla is a lot bigger than this movie. Godzilla takes place over a much longer time period from a lot more different perspectives, whereas this one is, notably because of the way that it's filmed, distinctly limited in its perspective and only takes place over the course of 6 hours or something. In terms of structure, I don't think they're really all that similar, but I mean, again, clearly if Godzilla had not been made, this movie wouldn't have been. But yeah, I wouldn't say that this is an updated remake of it or anything.
Oh no, you cannot update Godzilla, even though it has been updated many, many, many times. And I think that this is interesting in the fact that it is like a fourth or fifth generation from Godzilla, but also sort of grasping its way back to what Godzilla was originally about. I think this is a lot more action-y and war movie-ish than Godzilla obviously ever got, and is much less somber and reflective than Godzilla, but
definitely, yeah, which I don't think is what it's going for.
But it's striving for being about the same themes as Godzilla.
Roughly, yeah, except that it's there isn't a particular place to point the finger of blame in this movie. Godzilla is a direct result of nuclear power, and so very directly represents the threat of that strain of technology and the people who would use it and the people who don't understand it and use it callously. Whereas in this movie, the giant monster, again, very, very much reflecting the time and place in which it was made, the threat of the monster is completely random and comes out of nowhere. Nobody understands it. Nobody knows where it's come from or what its goals are or how to stop it.
Yeah.
Nobody knows anything at all about it.
Yeah, this movie is clearly about 9/11. It's clearly about the military response to 9/11. And it is, whereas Godzilla was clearly reckoning with the end of World War II and with the nuclear bombs and with, in a lot of cases, the people who got Japan into World War II in the first place, because Godzilla notably wrecks like the Japanese parliament and other pretty famous Tokyo landmarks associated with the Japanese government. This one,
yeah, and was notably created by American nuclear testing, although the Americans don't really help with cleaning it up.
This movie's not reflecting much on the debacles that America got into due to the War on Terror, other than the fact that the military, despite having enormous amounts of firepower, seems wildly impotent in all of its attempts to defeat this creature.
Yeah, and willing to sacrifice innocent American lives in the pursuit of defeating this enemy, which does form part of the, one central aspect of the climax of the movie, but isn't really hammered in to the point where it's a central theme.
So what did you think of the found footage aesthetic?
Well, and this would have been the first time that I'd seen it used, the first time that I saw it. And I think it works really well for this movie. Mm-hmm. It's, I've never been the biggest fan of it. It's just there's almost no way for it to not come across as a gimmick to me. And then, and I think the best thing that you could do is sort of own the fact that it's a gimmick and kind of lean into it, which I think this movie kind of does. The beginning stuff where it's saying, this tape is government property. It's over the top. But yeah, I think again that it reflects the paranoia of the time in which it was made. And and the time to which it's sort of harkening back to, because this would have been 7 years later, in that you feel the vulnerability of the characters, that not even the camera is safe from this threat, and certainly not the cameraman. So I think it does really suit the tone that they were going for.
Yeah, I mean, found footage was really created by the Blair Witch Project in the late 90s, and it's become a pretty strong, like, it's weird to call it a genre because of the fact that it's a technical choice and not like a thematic or narrative choice, in the sense that like sci-fi is a thematic and narrative choice. It's a technical choice,
right,
but it is sort of its own genre because of the fact that it comports to very specific rules and allows certain things. And the main thing that allows is that it allows movies to be filmed extremely cheaply.
Yes.
Which, like, the Blair Witch Project was made for like $1,000 or something like that, and made like $60 million. Or I'm pulling those numbers out of my ass. I don't know what I'm talking about, but it was very, very cheap and made a god awful amount of money. And that is like what a lot of these found footage movies do, is that it allows them to be made very, very cheap with sort of limited locations, limited special effects, and allows stuff to happen that you don't really need to bother to explain too much because the characters aren't going to know. All of which I think that this movie uses to its greatest advantage. That if it was not a found footage movie, this movie would have been like a $200-300 million movie, whereas it was made for like $25 million.
Yeah, and I think the way that it uses that filming technique to frame some of the set pieces is really creative. The way that it allows it to pace the movie is really interesting. What it is, again, is that you were saying it is more of a stylistic choice than a narrative or thematic choice, which I would agree with, but I think that it's most effective when it is used in such a way that's closer to the latter. I think it starts to get silly when it's arbitrary. There's a reason why this particular movie is found footage. There's a reason why the Blair Witch Project is found footage, aside from just being cheaper. And it seems like I've kind of a soft spot for at least the first Paranormal Activity movie. I never actually saw any of the sequels, but I enjoyed that movie when I saw it. It's not a great movie, but I think it's very watchable. But there's no real reason that movie is found footage. It doesn't really have anything to do with the story that it's telling. It's not a choice that had to be made to get that story across all the more effectively. It was made that way because it was cheaper and because it was a trend, because it was a bandwagon that it wanted to be on. And when it starts to be used that way, it starts to really annoy me.
Weirdly enough, the best usage of found footage is probably the VHS movies, because those use it in the most creative way possible and are constantly striving for new ways to use a found footage aesthetic to tell a story.
We'll have to cover those. I've never seen any of them.
Yeah, I mean, they're really good. They're made by some of the biggest names in horror right now, and yeah, they're really, really great. I would love to cover them. But I think that this movie takes full advantage of the fact that it is a found footage movie, and I don't know if I really need some sort of long expository speech about where this creature comes from, or what it wants, or why any of this is really happening.
No, absolutely not.
I think that it works better as, well, this is just a terrifying circumstance that these people are running through, and they have no way of knowing, and we have no way of knowing. And I think like any attempt to rationalize these details would only fall flat.
Absolutely. And that's something that I always really, really like in movies and stories, is when an element like that goes completely unexplained. I think it's a big part of why I dig this movie so much, is because of that very fact. Because it's, we were talking in the Babadook about how the Babadook has this sort of fairy tale quality to it. And I wouldn't say this. I wouldn't say that about this movie exactly, but it does.
Oh.
There is an appeal of that kind that exists all throughout movies that make that sort of choice. That say, no, we're not going to give a very well explained science fiction or fantasy explanation for why this thing exists. It's just an element of this world that our characters have to deal with. And there's something really powerful about that to me. And again, I think it is very much reflective of the crux of what this movie is trying to get at, which is depicting the fear of an enemy that you didn't see coming, and that is more powerful than you understand, and is completely unpredictable because you have no idea what it is or what its deal is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how old you were when 9/11 happened.
I was 4.
Yeah, I was in high school, because I'm an old person compared to you. And yeah, it is, for someone that did not know what life was like prior to 9/11 and after 9/11, like, it's really hard to explain the fact that that particular day, you had no idea what was going on, and you had no idea why it was going on, and it is really, really difficult to understand how that shattered so many illusions of what being safe felt like, and that it was not going to come back for possibly ever.
Yeah, and that's been something really surreal that I've had to live with all throughout my life, is that, I don't really remember 9/11. I'm told that because we lived in Maryland until I was 4, and then we moved down to Georgia, and we ended up delaying our move a little bit because of 9/11. And that same weekend, my grandmother's mother died, and I've been told that 4-year-old Tim just got it in his head that she had died in the plane crash. She didn't. She died of old age, but that was just that was apparently something I said. But I don't even remember saying that. I don't remember learning that 9/11 happened. So it's been this strange thing throughout my life that there's this event that I don't remember, but just about everything that has happened on a national stage in my lifetime is, to one extent or another, a repercussion of that thing. Every president has been elected and reelected to one extent or another because of that, or at least you could make the argument. So it's been really strange. It's this thing that I've had to deal with in kind of in the abstract, even though it is technically something that happened within my lifetime.
Yeah, which particularly because of the fact that, like, when I was a little kid, it was in the 90s. And the 90s were possibly the most upbeat decade possible. It was after the Soviet Union had fallen. And so, like, as American citizens, we were taught that, well, okay, everything is going to just get better and better and better, which, I mean, even that was kind of bogus, but that's the world that we were living in, was that it was just this, it was going to be, there was no evil empire left. We weren't under threat of nuclear weapons. Everything was going to be basically from now until the end of eternity, I don't know, sunshine and kittens. Like, that was what we were essentially taught to believe growing up in the 90s.
And then it all came quite literally crumbling down.
Yeah, and the actual day of 9/11, I tripped and fell down a flight of stairs and broke a bone in my foot. And
oh, Jesus.
Yeah, no, and literally everyone in the emergency room was sitting there while they were bleeding or whatever, watching news coverage of 9/11 and talking about news coverage of 9/11. And, like, by that point, we actually did have a solid idea that this was a terrorist attack. But when it actually happened that morning, no one knew what was going on. And pretty much every level of life in America was profoundly affected by 9/11, obviously. And that includes our pop culture, which is, our pop culture has spent, well, now it's like going on 2 decades of
very nearly, yeah.
Yeah, of reliving 9/11 and trying to fix 9/11 and grappling with 9/11.
Trying to make sense of it.
Probably the best examination of 9/11 and everything that came after it was Battlestar Galactica on Sci-Fi Channel.
I mean, Battlestar is generally a good choice for the best of anything.
Yeah, but that is very, 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 very explicitly about 9/11. And then following that, about the Iraq War, about the Patriot Act, about Guantanamo Bay. Like, it is the most incisive encapsulation of the Bush era that you could possibly hope to watch. But I actually have heard theories that the reason why superheroes have become so popular is because of the fact that it's basically constantly redoing 9/11, but with someone to save America.
Essentially, yeah. Man of Steel got a lot of shit for that. That the climax really cribs a lot of imagery from 9/11.
Oh, they all crib a lot of imagery from 9/11. I don't necessarily believe that's why superheroes became popular, because I think if you look at the 90s, if you look at the 80s, if you look at the 70s, and so on, you'll find the superheroes were always popular. But the specific brand of superheroism that we now see is pretty explicitly drawn from 9/11.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And then there's stuff like this movie, which is very, very much, I think, a wonderful approximation of trying to replicate that feeling of the early morning of 9/11 before anyone knew anything that was going on. And no one knew that morning that it was just going to be the 4 planes.
Yeah, that's the thing, is, yeah, we know, we can look back on it as, as a narrative now, that it was this one attack that then shook up everything, but nobody knew that was going to be it at that point. They didn't know if that was going to be it, or if World War III had just started. They didn't know if the White House would be leveled the next week.
No one knew what was going on, and, like, this movie encapsulates that so well, because of the fact that the characters are stuck in the situation and have nothing to go on except for police reports and then eventually military personnel. Or not police reports, news reports, and then eventually military personnel. And just stuff keeps happening to them, and they have no real way to understand or process any of it.
Yeah, Yeah, essentially. And again, I think that's the one of the best strengths of the movie is that you feel that panic and that uncertainty about the future.
Yeah, which I think is what really separates it from Godzilla, because Godzilla is very much reflective on things that have already happened, whereas this is trying to portray uncertainty about things that are about to happen.
Yeah, Godzilla is about people who are safe and the responsibility that they have towards the people who are not. Whereas this movie is just about the people who are not safe.
Well, do you want to start looking at our cast of characters?
Yeah, I guess we better.
Our main character is Rob Hawkins, played by Michael Stahl David, who is some sort of vice president of something involving business.
And Japan.
And he's moving to Japan for reasons that are not particularly clear, other than that there's business there.
There's a lot of good business. A lot of good business in Japan.
Yeah, it feels like that Adventure Time episode where the businessmen show up.
Yes, yeah, business. We do business.
Because it's all very, very vague what he does, but it's something involving business in Japan, and he's moving there. And he's in love with a girl named Beth, who he met in college. And Beth is rich, like super stupidly rich, and that's kind of all that we have for her.
Yeah, which, I mean, to be fair, she isn't in the movie as much, so she is an excuse. But I mean, none of these characters are really fleshed out all that much at all, which again, I think is part of the point of how the movie is done, although I do think it is one of the weaker aspects of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, that's a consistent problem across all found footage movies, is that they usually lack strong characterization. Some of them don't. I will absolutely 100% give props to the ones that don't, but a lot of them just, I don't know if it's the way the dialogue is done or the way that the found footage aesthetic styles, but they do seem to suffer from weaker characterization. So how did you feel, having watched Psycho Beach Party, to be deeply invested in a heterosexual relationship?
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. It's just again, it's just not as strong of a ship as really any of the ships in Psycho Beach Party.
Like, and this is
Psycho Beach Party is the best rom-com I've seen in a long time. The best since Happy Death Day.
Yeah, I mean, this is...
And Happy Death Day might be my favorite rom-com of all time, looking back on it.
Yeah, I mean, this is as, like, by the books, a heterosexual love story as you could possibly hope for. She's with another guy. He's in love with her and moping about it, and then you say this isn't a fairy tale, but she is a princess trapped in a tower at one point.
Yeah, kidnapped by a dragon.
Exactly.
Roughly.
And he has to go save her. I mean, like, this is borrowing heavily from Rapunzel.
Yeah, that's a good point. I never even thought about that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it was just because I just saw Psycho Beach Party. But this time around, I was watching this guy and I was like, dude, just let it go. Like you're going to die, and you're gonna get all your friends killed because of this broad who is like definitely dead already. And I know that it turns out she isn't, but that was a Schrodinger's cat, and all signs pointed to her being dead.
Which the weird thing is that he has barely any reaction to his brother's death, but like is obsessed with finding this girl.
Yeah, and it's like, come on, man.
All right, and then we should mention that he has a brother,
Jason, right?
Yes, Jason, played by Mike Vogel, who is that guy in a lot of things. He's one of the people that you will look up his IMDb page and find that he's been in like 3 things you've seen and you don't remember him at all. He plays the generically handsome guy in most things he's in.
It's the role he was born to play, pretty clearly.
And he is dating a woman named, or possibly married to, I don't think we have a clear definition of what their relationship is, a woman named Lily. And then Rob's best friend is Hud, played by TJ Miller, who is creepy in a way that I don't think came off as creepy as it did, or as it does in 2008. And
he's very TJ Millery in this movie.
And he has a thing for a woman named Marlena, played by Lizzie Kaplan, who Marlena knows Lily, and that's about all we ever find out about her. She knows Lily and she doesn't know Rob.
Yeah, and it's just sort of a poor man's Parker Posey, I guess.
Well, she's definitely no Parker Posey in Scream 3.
No, absolutely. But yeah, I was thinking, like, I really like TJ Miller. I've really enjoyed him in a lot of things, but I don't think that he really works in this movie. I feel like he really undercuts a lot of the drama by making TJ Miller jokes at rather inopportune times, and I think that he gives gives the movie too much levity, all things considered. I think this movie would have been stronger if it was because everything about it is just so okay. We're not stopping for character development. We're not stopping to take a break. It's just go, go, go all the time, panic, and that's its strength because again, that's what it's trying to depict, and it's a very good depiction of that by and large. And I feel like T.J. Miller's character HUD kind of stands out like a sore thumb in that some of the time.
Yeah, I mean, and part of it is the found footage aesthetic. Instead of him looking wistfully at Marlena, he's creepily recording her across the room. So he just comes off as kind of unpleasant.
Yeah, he's a voyeur and he's a smartass, and while also being pretty dumb, all things considered. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think he's the high point of this movie.
And the backstory of this movie, which is sort of interestingly interwoven throughout the main movie, is that Rob and Beth had sex a month before the events of the night, and they filmed each other the morning after, and then they decided to go to Coney Island and have a wonderful day together. Aw, aren't they so sweet?
Aww.
And sort of every so often someone like rewinds the camera to see something that previously happened or whatever, and you get to see more footage from their day together.
I wonder how many like bros went to go see this movie, to watch a giant monster wreck some shit, and at some point was like, this is bullshit. This movie tricked me into watching home movies.
Yeah, well, he definitely forgot to take the date off of his day of love with Beth. But yeah, how'd you like the occasionally cutting to that day throughout the movie?
And see, like I thought that was a source of, I mean, it's never on long enough to provide levity exactly, but I thought that the way that those kind of broke up the action a little bit did actually kind of work, just because it is kind of heartbreaking to look back on what the world used to be and what these people's world used to be. So I thought that was a more effective way of giving the audience a break from the panic every once in a while than T.J. Miller's character.
But the main action takes place on the night of Rob's going away party because he's going to Japan for business, and Jason is supposed to record goodbyes from everyone at this party, and then he for some reason decides to give the camera to HUD and have him do it.
Who has never heard of this concept?
Well, like everyone seems deeply confused by it, and then deeply confused by the fact that everyone else says, well, like in a wedding.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, their friend is moving to Japan. Like, it seems like the kind of thing where you would be like, oh yeah, no, I totally get that we should say goodbye, or we should film goodbye so that, we're not going to see this guy for who knows how long.
Yeah, basically the first 20 minutes of this movie are kind of like a low-key satire of rich New Yorkers and how bullshit all of their social interactions are.
Yeah, I don't know. The first 20 minutes of this movie I find deeply weird, because it is like people that are deeply invested in things that you have no investment in whatsoever. I think that's intentional, but it is kind of weird to watch for 20 minutes, particularly when Beth shows up with another guy, Travis, played by Superstore's Ben Feldman, who is another guy who's been in all those different things that you've seen, but don't remember him. But she shows up with another guy, and then Rob is fuming, and then it comes out that Rob and Beth had sex, and they're fighting on the balcony, and she storms off, and he's deeply upset, and yeah, like everyone is incredibly invested in Rob and Beth's relationship.
Yeah, there's this whole episode of Friends going on in the first scenes in this movie that doesn't. Well, I guess you're right. It does sort of tie in actually with what goes on throughout the rest of the movie, but it's not. Again, things take a turn, and I guess you gotta have a first act somehow in a found footage movie, and this is as good a way of any as going about it.
It's like it is so much bullshit. And there's an agonizing scene where Jason, HUD, and Rob are all like on the balcony together talking about that Beth is like, I don't know, this glorious goddess figure to all of them. And I'm like, oh my god, guys, get over it. Like,
yes, please. Which again, I was saying for the rest of the movie.
I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I did not care about the central relationship that is the driving force of the entire movie. I could not have given a crap about.
No, not particularly. And I think you could maybe argue that it's intentional. intentional, that the frivolousness of people's problems in the first part of this movie reflects the pre-catastrophe world, that you can then look back on and say, man, why did we care about all that bullshit stuff? And that our quote-unquote hero's desperation to get Beth back is sort of his attempt to hang on to a piece of that world, to kind of piece that world back together a little bit. And I think you could absolutely argue that it is that effort that gets them all killed. Because if he hadn't done that, if he had just, if he had just let them all be evacuated with the rest of them, then they might have lived. It was them doing this whole side quest throughout the whole movie that is the reason that it doesn't end well.
I feel like they definitely the movie wants you to consider everything that happens at Rob's party to be frivolous bullshit. Like, I think that might even be why it is so horribly vague what Rob even does, that it's just business in Japan, because it is so unimportant in the grand scheme of the universe. But I also think the movie thinks we're going to have way more invested in the relationship between Rob and Beth than at least I actually do.
Yeah, I think that's the case. Yeah, and I think I might be giving the movie a bit too much credit with that interpretation.
Like, I think that the movie wants to be at least be understandable that all these people would risk their lives in order to have Rob and Beth have this magical moment of togetherness and love, but I don't know. But yeah, so all of a sudden there's an earthquake and a huge amount of lights go black or are blacked out, and they wind up checking the news, and the news talks about how there's a tanker that's overturned by the Statue of Liberty. And then there's more earthquakes, and they see an explosion, and they run down to the street, and there is a giant thing that falls from the sky, crashes into a building, and then rolls down the street, and it turns out to be the head of the Statue of Liberty, which was pretty much this movie's entire marketing strategy.
Yeah, basically. Which I was thinking watching this movie, I was like, this is because Independence Day gets a lot of shit for being such a distinctly pre-9/11 movie, that it's blowing up famous American monuments, but it's sort of fun. It's just, supposed to be this kind of dumb popcorn action movie, and a couple years after that movie came out, people found it a little harder to laugh at that. And so this movie also has the destruction of famous monuments. See, it has the Statue of Liberty going down, it has the Brooklyn Bridge going down, but it's all treated very seriously and very horrifically. I wonder if this movie was sort of designed to make reparations for Independence Day a little bit.
This movie is much more aware of what seeing an important landmark being destroyed actually feels like.
Yeah, because again, people got a first-hand taste of that in the interim. Which, that reminds me, when they all go up to the roof and they're looking at the wreckage, somebody in the soundscape of people shouting at each other and wondering what's going on, somebody says, "Is this another terrorist attack?" Which leads me to believe that 9/11 happened in this universe, which kind of bothers me a little bit, since the whole thing is supposed to, is so clearly supposed to be an allegorical version of 9/11, that it's weird to me that 9/11 also happened. It's not that it's particularly contradictory. It's not like after 9/11 happened, we were less likely to be attacked by a giant monster alien thing. But I don't know. Like, when you're making such an obvious reference to a particular historical event and making a comment on it by doing this more fantastical version of it, I feel like at least not acknowledging that the actual event also did take place not too long prior, I think is kind of more the way to go. But that's just me.
Yeah, it is sort of an interesting conundrum of how do you draw the line between what you remove from your fictional world and what you leave in. Well, none of them have their cell phones on them, so they literally go to loot an electronics store. While they're looting,
or again, our guy, what is the name of our main character?
Rob.
I can't believe I forgot that. It's Rob who runs across the street and starts looting the electronics store because it is so absolutely important that he talks to Beth. Yeah. No, wait, isn't it? They don't loot the electronics store until after they try to cross the Brooklyn Bridge, which is where Jason gets killed, right?
No, because first there's the dust storm and whatever, they're on the street and a huge dust storm comes by, and so they hide out in a store. They
take shelter in just like a little Stop and Shop or something.
Yeah, and then once the dust storm passes, they go back outside, and HUD sees something moving that is gigantic behind the Empire State Building, which subsequently collapses. So they go rewind to look at the Empire State, or look at whatever he saw, and they run into Marlena, who had been on the street street and is covered in dust and only has cryptically to say, it's eating them. It's eating people. So they decide that the best way out of the city is to go across the Brooklyn Bridge. And as they're crossing, Jason gets separated from them and winds up climbing on top of a light to try and re-meet up with them. But then a giant tail comes down, literally right on top of him, exactly where he is, and destroys the bridge. Oh, poor Jason.
We knew you so well? Question mark.
Let's see. Facts that we knew about Jason.
His name is Jason.
His name is Jason. He had some sort of romantic relationship with Lily. He was brothers with Rob, and he has a mother.
Yes.
That is a well fleshed out character right there.
And yeah, again, I don't want to give this movie in particular too much shit for that, because again, I think it is. Again, I don't think it's like they set out to have this really amazingly fleshed out and complex cast of characters. They're supposed to be everymen. I think they could have stood to be a little more distinct, but just not in the way that T.J. Miller's character is distinct. but yeah, I don't rag on it too much, because again, I think it is sort of what they were going for. I think it's one of the less well executed elements in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we definitely need rich, deep emotional complexity to all these characters, but it's definitely not putting in the level of effort that it really should have to characterize them.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be a movie about these really rich, complex characters facing a random monster. That's a different movie. It's a really good movie. It's called The Monster. It came out last year, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Which is probably all in all a better movie than this. But it's not what this movie was trying to be.
But yeah, after that, they decide to loot an electronics store, because none of their cell phones work, which allows them to watch more news reports about the monster. It's destroying the city.
Yeah, which, did those news anchors sound sufficiently horrified to you? They didn't really to me.
No, they really don't.
Like New York City is being destroyed by a giant monster, and they're like, Diane, we're getting some really incredible footage over here. Couldn't you be like praying or something, or weeping, loosening your tie a little bit? I don't know. I don't know what the proper way for a newsman to react, but I don't think it's maintaining that level of composure. People generally didn't retain that level of composure reporting on 9/11, which was at least within the bounds of reality as it had been accepted up to that point.
Yeah.
These people have to be accepting that there are giant monsters in the world, and also that Manhattan just isn't going to be around anymore. And they have to relay this information to the American public, and they're doing it pretty level-headedly.
Yeah, I think that they are a little bit flat.
Which is weird, because most of the acting, for how much we've ragged on the characters, most of the acting in the movie is pretty good. Most of our characters aren't very deeply characterized, but when they have to react to horrifying things happening on a grand scale, they do so well. So it's not like there's a lot of rampant poor direction in this movie. It's just that those little bits that we got, which are really just in that scene, really. They seem like they were from a different, cheesier movie where it wasn't supposed to be as much of a big deal. So I don't know, but that's a tiny thing. That's a nitpick.
But Rob manages to get the phone and calls Beth. They have an abrupt conversation where she basically tells him she's dying, and they go out into the street and wind up getting separated by literally tanks and military personnel, and
got there pretty darn quick, all things considered.
Yeah, and have to take shelter in a subway stop, which is where Rob calls his mother, tell her that his brother is dead. Then they wind up getting the idea that instead of evacuating out of the city, they should go rescue Beth by going through the dark and foreboding subway tunnels.
Always a good idea. But yeah, see, again, in that scene, that's kind of a tense and kind of mournful scene, where Rob, remembered it, is on the phone with his mother, and then T.J. Miller is filming this very silently, and then he walks over and looks at the other girl and is like, should I say something? I feel like I should say something. What are you doing? Why did you make that choice, screenwriters, to put that line in there? That scene did not need that.
I would have liked to have had more of Rob on the phone with his mother so that we could feel a little bit more of his emotional processing of his brother's death, because it doesn't seem to have...
Yeah, or just at least not have what we got so undermined.
Yeah, because it does seem like there isn't much point to making Jason Rob's brother if Rob is not going to have any deep emotional reaction to it. Which, I mean, I guess you could argue that his attempt to save Beth is transference from his inability to save his brother, but...
And I don't think that's necessarily reading too deep into it, but it's not... I could have used that being a little more explicit, if that is the case.
I would have liked to have heard that conversation he had with his mother better and more completely. I think it would have made him a stronger character if we were able to get a better grasp on his emotional state throughout all of this.
Yes.
But so they decide to start walking through the tunnels, and it seems like they're walking in the tunnels for a fairly decent amount of time because they have all sorts of weird conversations until they notice that rats are all running in a single direction, which these people are not the brightest bulbs in the light box because of the fact that they keep stopping. Once they see the rats all running in one direction, they keep stopping and standing around for a while to have conversations, as opposed to running the fuck in the same direction as the rats.
Yeah, it's like these vermin have the right idea. Let's fucking go.
But they do run for a little bit, but then they hear a clicking sound, and then which leads them to stop and try and figure out how the camera's night vision works. Oh my god, that's stupid.
Yeah. It does give us the scariest shot in the movie, though.
Yeah, which is earlier in one of the news reports, they had been mentioning that things were dropping off of the monster, and it had these like weird little human-sized flea things that were falling off and then attacking people, and they turned the night vision on, and all of a sudden they can see those little monstery things, and the monstery things chase after them.
Yeah, and they're really scary. Like that's an intense sequence. They're like these giant like spidery things. They have these weird sort of beaky jaws. It's really, and they're really, really fast.
Do you think the design of the fleas is better than the design of the main monster?
I mean, we don't see the full design of the main monster really until towards the end of the movie. We only ever, we'll see a random leg or see, its head for a brief second. Although this is one that I know I've campaigned often on this podcast for more lingering shots of monsters and ghosts and such like in movies. But I think this is a place where it really works. I think it really did take the lessons from Jaws and Alien and apply them in the right way, where you're given just glimpses, but they're tantalizing glimpses because they make it so that it's still an unknown quantity. But yeah, I really like the design for the monster as it ultimately exists. But yeah, I think the lice or whatever they are more frightening just in the way that they move. Just 'cause they move so quick and they're so skittery and but they're still weighty just because they're big. So like when one of them attacks people, like you can feel you can see the weight of them on top of this person, but also see how fast their little legs are moving, and it's like the worst of both. It's like it combines the horror of like having a cockroach run over your hand and having a spider bite your face and being mauled by a wild boar. Like it's all three of those animal fears rolled into one, and it is really kind of unpleasant to watch.
This might just be me personally, but I don't read malice in the design of the big monster. That it is much more like just a natural creature that exists, and it happens to have found itself in a city and is doing what naturally comes to it. Whereas,
which I think is what either J.J. Abrams or Matt Reeves said about the creature, was that it was supposed to be an infant, which is in itself a scary thought. But yeah, that it's not something that wandered into New York City with the intent to destroy it. It's something that showed up there and is being attacked and is defending itself, and that it feels cornered. I think Matt Reeves said that at some point. He said the whole idea of this movie was that there's nothing scarier than a big predator when it's cornered. That it will lash out in any kind of way. So I think that's very much intentional.
Yeah, whereas the little lice creatures, little in relativistic terms, that I do read a lot of malice in their design.
Yeah, they're parasites.
Yeah, they're just nasty, awful things. Whereas it feels like if you could just get the big monster out to the ocean, it would just go home.
Wherever that is.
But so one of the lice monsters attacks Rob, but Lily is able to beat it off, and one of them winds up grabbing a hold of Hud and trying to drag him away, but Marlena is able to beat it off, but she gets bit by it in the process, and they wind up...
Which Hub never expresses any guilt over. Like, he's never like, oh man, if she hadn't come back to save me, then like she would have been okay. Like, he never has that. I think he's too dumb to have considered that.
Yeah, and then they somehow wind up in like the basement of a department store that seems to be connected to the subway.
I mean, that's a thing. Because they're like the only subway I've ever been on extensively is the DC subway, but like there are stations of those that lead into like Sears and shit.
Because they wind up in this little room where Rob's suggestion is that they just take another tunnel, and everyone's like, no, that's terrible.
Like, no more tunnels. Tunnels are a bad idea. Tunnels are always bad.
Yeah. And so then he's just like, okay, well, let's just go up top. And like HUD's like, well, HUD literally does say, so it's either take a tunnel and die, go up top and die, or wait here and die.
Yeah, which is also a pretty good line. That's the thing, is that a lot of T.J. Miller's lines are funny. It's just that they don't always come in moments that I think should be funny.
But so they wind up again going up top, which is a department store, where they wind up sort of accidentally stumbling upon a military base, like a mobile military base that is also like a biohazard base, and they see all these dead bodies and all these injured people, and Marlena starts bleeding from the eyes, and the military personnel immediately scream, "She was bit!" and take her to this sort of like quarantine area where she explodes.
Yeah, or something. Yeah, we don't see exactly what happened. We only even like get the hint of it for like a split second, which again is also pretty horrifying.
Yeah, it is a disturbing scene, because you see the blood and you see the panic on basically all of the military people's faces about what is about to happen. I assume that something alienish just happened to her, where it laid eggs in her or something.
That was my thought.
Like,
yeah, and that would have been that would have made sense. It would have been hilarious if on top of everything, if not only is there this giant monster, but there are also these tiny monsters that live on its back, and then also if they bite you, you become a zombie. Like that would have been a pretty amazing premise for a movie. And that moment is also really nice, because it's very much like there's a moment that I think I've talked about before on this podcast, but it's my favorite moment in the movie The Mist, which I won't talk about in detail because it's a really great moment. I don't really want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen that movie, but there's a scene where, because in that movie there are lots of different kinds of monsters that show up throughout that movie from some other dimensional portal or whatever, and they eat each other a lot of the time in addition to trying to eat people. And there's a moment that really towards the end of the movie that it's a very somber moment where the characters that are still alive, it's not stated, but you can see on their faces there's this realization that there's been this entirely new food chain that has just been put into place, and we are at the bottom of it. That the tiniest of these things, of these new kinds of creatures, can fuck us up irreparably, and they're just a rung above us, and just the extent beyond that to which it goes when they suddenly realize just how far up above them that chain goes is really powerful. And I think that that moment does something kind of similar. It's not somber, it's horrifying and urgent, but it does give you a sense of, again, just the magnitude of this threat, because again, these little bug things are not the main threat. They're not the most dangerous thing that's happening. They're a side effect. They are the fleas of the real threat, quite literally, and they can do that to a person. That's what the side effect of what's happening now. The side effect of this thing, which again, according to the creators, is an infant. Is a single infant member of a species that exists in some capacity, and the relatively minuscule parasites of this infant of one species can damage people to that extent. That moment really kind of made me think about it like that. That it's another sort of, what is this world going to be now that it has these things in it, and how can we possibly have any hope of surviving it?
It is one of the more horrifying moments in this film. This movie was definitely billed as a horror movie, but a lot of the stuff has sort of migrated out of horror. A lot of the kaiju stuff is now more action or sci-fi stuff, and this is sort of returning those elements to their horror roots.
Yeah, which again is something that I like a lot about it, is that it is a scary movie. The giant monster is scary, and the little monsters are also scary. And I think as an example of how you can make a giant monster movie beginning to end frightening and intense in this day and age, I think it really succeeds with flying colors, even though, again, it's not the most emotionally affecting or thematically rich movie.
Well, the military winds up telling them that at 6 o'clock in the morning, they are going to blow up Manhattan. Literally, it's going to cease to exist.
Yeah, if they have still failed to kill the thing by then.
And then gives them a location where the last chopper's out, a very sort of last chopper out of Saigon type of thing, is going to take place. And so they
but one good Samaritan lets them escape, and is like, go get your lady friend before we blow all this to smithereens, which I think really makes him not very good at his job.
They're able to find Beth's building, but it is knocked over and leaning on another building that's right next to it. And so they climb 57 stories up this other building and then walk across from sort of the damaged apartment at that floor across onto the ceiling of Beth's apartment building, and then navigate their way through sort of the twisted gravity of the hallways to find Beth lying in her apartment with a piece of rebar through her shoulder. And our lovers are reunited at last.
Yeah, and Beth, as it turns out, is pretty much fine and is really like mobile throughout the rest of the movie, and there never seems to be any real hurry to get her medical attention. Like, and she can talk and she can run, and she's doing pretty good for, you know, having had a spike through her chest.
Yeah, which, I mean, they're able to get her down those 57 flights of stairs relatively quickly, because I feel like it would be 6 o'clock in the morning before they actually got all the way up there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and also when they were going back across the roof of the knocked over building, as they're crossing it, they can see the monster still crashing through Midtown and heading towards them, but it has still not made it there quite yet by the time they get back to the lobby.
They manage to escape the building, which, and again, she's a princess trapped in a tower. It is literally Rapunzel. They get down to the lobby. They wind up getting to where the helicopters are going off from. Lily gets into one helicopter, and everyone else piles into another helicopter. And HUD is, of course, still filming as they're flying, and they see a B-52 drop a bunch of bombs on the creature. And, of course, they think that's dead. But it leaps out of a puff of smoke and knocks their helicopter out of the sky, which the helicopter crashes into Central Park. And somehow, Rob, Beth, and HUD are still alive while the pilot is dead.
Yeah. There's another really good shot there, which is the camera has fallen, which the camera, whatever this camera is made of, that it survives all of this shit is pretty impressive. And the lens doesn't crack, the lens doesn't get any dirt on it. I want whatever brand of camera that is.
Yeah, Rob paid for the solid diamond camera. The only camera made entirely out of diamonds.
Yeah, and encrusted with platinum on top. But so the camera's fallen on the ground again, still perfectly intact, having survived this helicopter crash. And there's a shot of, I think it's Rob. I think it's Rob who's still unconscious. And there's a shot of his head kind of lying on the grass, and you can see the grass of Central Park stretching off, and you can see the city in the background. And then overhead, you see a bunch of planes flying away from the spot where our heroes are right now, which means from earlier that they're getting ready to blow it all up. Which I think that's a really evocative image given the context.
These people are about to die in the worst way possible.
Yeah, no matter what happens, they're about to die in either the worst way possible or the second worst way possible.
Yeah, because HUD is running across Central Park, and just the creature looms over him, and he films it for a little bit, and then it just leans down and eats him.
Yeah.
Eats half of him. It eats his lower half while the upper half falls back down to the ground because the upper half still has the camera on it.
Yeah, and he goes on to join whatever afterlife the lawyer from Jurassic Park is in.
Yep, and then Rob and Beth grab the camera, and then they document themselves, essentially, and document all of the people. They say, I'm Rob, and I lived through this night and saw my brother Jason, and saw Marlena, and all these other people die, and then gives it to Beth, who does a similar statement, and then you just see, an enormous orange light, and everything sort of collapses, and the last things you hear are that Rob and Beth declare that they love each other.
Aww. Because Peter isn't that really what this movie was about.
This is about the beauty of love. I mean, this is a love story right up there with Yo-Yo and Provolone from Psycho Beach Party.
And with Happy Death Day.
But yeah, and then the camera cuts back to the events happening the month before, where Rob and Beth are at Coney Island, and for some reason they're filming sort of the island, and in the very background you can see something falling from the sky and crash into the ocean, and then Rob and Beth put the camera back on themselves and talk about how they've had a wonderful day, and the movie ends. So what'd you think about the ending?
Well, at the time, that was probably one of the first real downer endings that I'd ever seen, and so I remember being really affected by it then. As it stands now, I think it is kind of the only way that the movie could end, and it is, this is a PG-13 movie, I'm pretty sure, especially just given the fact that nobody in this movie is just constantly saying fuck in reference to what is happening, but it really doesn't shy away from being pretty bleak with its story, you know. And so I think it is, you know, again, even though it's not the most original thing in the world for a horror movie, but I think it is kind of ballsy that at the end it's like, no, they just die. That nobody makes it out of this, you know. So I do appreciate that, and I think it is a fittingly somber note to end the movie on.
I think that, like, this is a movie about tragedy, and I don't think it could have ended in any way that wasn't deeply tragic.
Exactly.
Like, again, going back to Godzilla, I don't think that movie could have ended in a way that wasn't tragic, and it did end in a way that was tragic.
Although at least that movie ended with the defeat of the monster. It was just that defeat was tinged with tragedy. You know, here we don't even know what happened. Yeah. You know, we just, you know, I guess we know from the setup that, you know, that the U.S. government still exists in some capacity, but we don't know if this killed the creature or if it just shook off the rubble and continued to go stomping across the U.S., or if more showed up.
At the very, very, very end of the credits, there is sort of a bit of static that if you play backwards, it says it's still alive. This movie sort of had to end in tragedy, and if we are to take a look at the monster as a metaphor for terrorism or a metaphor for the forces that drove 9/11, then yeah, it's gonna still be alive.
Yeah, it's not something that you emerge triumphantly from. You know, it is something that, best case scenario, you survive by the skin of your teeth, and probably not that. Well, yeah, and so I'm really looking forward to then covering 10 Cloverfield Lane, because everything that I've heard about it indicates that it's going to answer all of my questions very clearly and very concisely.
Yeah, I mean, one of the major, again, I saw this in theaters, and the thing that everyone talked about after the movie was over was the bit about the thing falling into the ocean.
Which I don't think I even caught that. I'll have to legit go back and watch that.
Yeah, like, you have to watch very, very carefully because it is quite subtle, but that was all anyone was talking about. I really don't recall that much talk about the metaphors for terrorism that were going on throughout all of this movie.
Maybe people weren't ready to acknowledge it quite yet.
And, well, maybe it's just the fact that I am friends with a lot of sci-fi fans, and instead of looking at it from a socio-political lens, they were all looking at it from a sci-fi lens and being like, oh, well, what's this thing that fell out of the sky? Was that the monster? Was that something that fell on the monster?
Yeah, and it's like, you guys, you're missing the point here. If the point was what the monster's deal was, then the movie would have at all acknowledged what the monster's deal was.
But yeah, and this was a movie that had a sequel in development for, like, forever. And they were always talking about how they were going to film the same night from a different perspective, and that was what the sequel was going to be. And then we wound up getting a very, very different sequel.
Yeah, which I have not seen, and which I've mostly avoided spoilers for, but just the general tone of the reception indicates that it will probably not satisfy the curiosities that, you know, that say some of your friends were left with at the end of the first movie, at least not in the way that they perhaps wanted.
Yeah, and then really shortly after 10 Cloverfield Lane is the upcoming Cloverfield sequel, which will be out this year, which again seems to be
and then another one after that, right?
Yeah,
also this year.
Not also this year, but
I'm pretty sure it was. I think because I looked it up when I was pulling up the movie. Hang on, my turn to make a wiki trip. Yeah, and then the fourth one is going to be called Overlord, and that's supposed to come out in October of this year. So yeah, so we're getting 2 Cloverfield movies this year.
Fascinating, since it was like what?
It's 10 years. Well, was Cloverfield Lane last year or the year before?
It was in 2016.
All right, yeah, so 8 years between the first 2.
But yeah, I am deeply fascinated by how this franchise is going to go forward because, well, we'll discuss it more in the second, or when we do 10 Cloverfield Lane, but I am very, very excited for its upcoming sequels.
Yeah, I'm fascinated because I never thought, like, I was never particularly anxious for a sequel to this. I thought that it was very much kind of its own thing, and again, just from seeing trailers and things for 10 Cloverfield Lane, it seems like such a different movie entirely that I'm like, what is the identity of this franchise going to be? At the end of this year, looking back on the 4 movies that we will now have, what is going to be the connecting thread? Yes, I'm really excited to talk about 10 Cloverfield Lane and then to see the other sequels coming out this year.
Me too. And I've seen 10 Cloverfield Lane, and I can tell you it is excellent.
I heard it was great. I heard it was awesome. And John Goodman is in it. That's
John Goodman
pretty good stamp of quality.
Yeah.
Who we talked about just a couple weeks ago, since he's wonderful in Paranorman.
He is in it, and he plays a very fascinating character. If we felt that this movie did not have enough characterization, 10 Cloverfield Lane has all of this movie's characterization and then some.
Well, I think J.J. Abrams probably heard those criticisms, and when the time rolled around to make a sequel, he was like, "Get me Goodman."
And it is really, really good. I would say it's better than this movie, and this is a movie that I like quite a bit.
All right, cool. I'm hyped. Color me hyped.
So let's get to best death. Who had the best death in this movie?
HUD. It was a fittingly both horrifying and kind of hilarious death for his character.
All right, I'm going to go with Marlena because it was so creepy.
Yeah,
I just got to go with her because it was just so creepy.
It is a very unpleasant scene.
All right, well, thank you for listening. I hope you are as hyped for our upcoming Cloverfield movies as we are. Have a great night and avoid all those giant monsters attacking Midtown.
Yeah, just stay in Queens.
Bye-bye.
Safer on the mainland. So long.